Hey, it's Brooks with Character Design Forge. Color. It's about time that someone stood up and said that color has value. Not just some color, all color. Now, some people think that this is a gray area, and those people are right. Of course, choosing colors can be incredibly subjective and relative to personal tastes, to the context of an image, to style, but there's also some universal principles and tricks that can help your choices be intentional, make sense, and look good. So I'm using Procreate on the iPad Pro for demonstration, but these tips will work in any digital art app with a color picker. The first thing is value. Value, as you can see here, is just this grayscale from white to black. However, every color, not just these, have value. If you look at a color picker that's arranged this way, no matter where the color is in the picker, it has a value. A high value is either something that's pure or close to pure white or black, and a low value is this middle gray area. Now I think if you start keeping track of the values of the colors that you use, you'll already have a big leg up because of the way that different values interact with each other. For example, two high value colors that are next to each other have a lot of contrast, like black next to white, but low values or similar values have low contrast. Contrast calls attention to something. So if everything in an image is screaming for attention, then it's all competing. And if nothing has very high contrast, then nothing is calling for attention. This is why a lot of times you'll see people paint in grayscale, because it's a quick way to understand which things are drawing attention. Here's another cool thing about values. If you're looking at a scene, especially something like a landscape, objects will be darker or higher in value the closer they are to you during the daytime, and lighter in value the closer they are to you in the nighttime. Now this all has to do with lighting, and in a lot of cases the atmosphere, the literal air. You can stage the color of things in a similar way to create a light or dark mood to something like an illustration or a comic scene. Making your character or focus the lightest object in a dark scene or the darkest in a light will bring them out better. When you make a piece of art that is lineless, absolutely everything hinges on your use of value. Every choice of color in the piece matters, because of which things may overlap or interact with each other. Value also comes into play when something is rendered with line art. Line art breaks shapes up with division lines instead of rendering them realistically. But if you're trying to add a lot of color to something with thick line art, you instantly have a lot of black that's demanding attention or even detracting from the rest of the piece. Sometimes the solution to this is to tone the entirety of the line art with something lighter than black, something like a navy blue or deep brown, just to take the edge off of the pure black, which is often not a good thing to use. Other times the solution is to color the line art, and choosing colors for colored lines can be tricky. That's because when a line color touches the fill color, it's good to have a significant change in value to indicate that this is still line art, instead of a weird shading outline on something that's lineless. So it's usually a good bet to make darker versions of your fill color for lines. Also consider what other colors the lines will come up against. If your background color is darker or more saturated than your lines, you now have a weird scenario where the background looks more important than the character, and it tends to feel off. But say you're looking to make a darker shade or variant or line from a color that you already have. You just shift it down in value, right? Make it darker? Well, making something purely darker in value actually tends to make it look flat, sterile, and lifeless, because it's insinuating a light condition that isn't really natural. Instead, when making a darker shade, try to increase the saturation of the new shade. Saturation in the color picker is measured from left to right here. And where possible, shift the hue, that's the rainbow slider, slightly up or down. Oftentimes it works well to shift a little bit toward red or blue in either direction. And there's actually a reason for that on a science and color wavelength level that's pretty cool. So don't just make your color darker, make it a little more saturated and give it a slight hue shift. That same idea we talked about with value, of a high value meaning more importance, applies to saturation as well. And there's a tendency, especially with newer artists, to pick only colors in this high saturation range. The result is that everything is important at once, and therefore nothing is. It also means that you have, say, strong reds going against strong greens, for example, and that tends to make colors clash. Red and green, for example, are complementary, or opposite colors, so you can see how both of them demanding importance right next to each other makes for visual confusion. So instead, choose a winner from the outset. Choose the color that you would like to be the dominant tone. So in this case, red. My red will be high in saturation. Now when I go to choose my green, look how light and desaturated it is. From here, it almost looks like it's too gray, that there's other greens in the picker that are greener. But now next to our red, it's plenty green. That's because of the huge contrast in hue. See how relative color choice is? This is part of why color theory is so daunting or intimidating or confusing to people. It's because you could make this choice, or you could make that choice, but what am I even doing here? Where's my wallet? Why is that guy on fire? The other reason why color theory can feel unhelpful at times is because you're just talking about things and not putting them into practice. And practice is really the best way to get a feel for use of color. But guess what? The things that I just told you about were all principles of color theory. I tricked you into learning it without saying the words color theory. One more quick concept to consider is the idea of earned color. So for example, here I have a really vibrant, high value, high saturation blue that glows from this character. But notice that there's quite a bit of dark blue and regular blue that's also surrounding the character, balancing it out. It eases the eye into the vibrancy of this glowing blue. You've earned the right to use it, if that makes sense. In a painted or lineless piece, this same idea applies, and you may use gradation to slowly build toward your most extreme color. Now for a few things that are really helpful, especially when using digital art. Now you could call these tricks, but I mean, to what end? We aren't grinding seashells for their purple pigment anymore. We aren't mixing colors trying to avoid inhaling toxic chemicals and shedding bristles in our mix pan. This is client work that's due Thursday. Let's forego some of the puritanism and get some work done. When you're trying to assemble a color palette to work from, I like to use something of a 70-20-10 rule. The majority of the colors will be a variant on one main hue, and then 20% are from the complement, or somewhere across the color wheel from the main hue. And then 10% is a little highlight color from a third hue that you use sparingly. It may even be a color that you use as a rim light or highlight when rendering, but let's not talk about rendering in this video. Sometimes though, you want to use a few different colors, but they just aren't going together. So assemble the colors that aren't cooperating together. Now create a new layer and set the blending mode to overlay, and fill it with either a dominant color or something completely different. Now drop the opacity of this layer between 10 and 20% to taste. Now what's happening here is that you're taking a lot of different colors and pulling them toward a central average. Usually this causes the colors to be a lot more harmonious and cohesive. Similar layers are used when lighting and rendering an image, and it instantly makes everything look a little more believable now that every disparate color is being equally affected by the same light source. Now, color is something that you can easily borrow from if you find images that you like or use those sites that give you pre-made palettes. Now, I would do as much as you can to really build up your own ability to color pick though, especially because your art is going to have a whole different context than an isolated palette or someone else's art. Now, I would say at the very least, if you go this route, try to manually choose the colors by eye from looking at your reference instead of eyedropping off of the image itself. It is, in some ways, a little bit similar to tracing. If tracing is all you ever did, you wouldn't be able to create something original without it. So try and wean yourself off of the training wheels, and you'll thank yourself later. My name's Brooks, I love characters, and I'm here to help you with your art. Liking, subscribing, following me on the social media that you'll see in a few seconds, and even keeping the forge burning on Patreon are all things you can do if this video helped you. Thank you for watching Character Design Forge, and have fun creating.